This is a Canon PowerShot A85 digital camera. This camera was manufactured in 2004. So as of the making of this video, that would make it 15 years old. This camera has a problem, and this is a very common problem for cameras from that era, and particularly from Canon, and that is the CCD, or the charge couple device, fails. Now, the CCD is the electronic device which captures the light and turns it into an image. It is the equivalent of electronic film. It's what makes a digital camera a digital camera. But the CCD device has a very high failure rate in this particular camera. And we're going to try to replace that CCD and see if we can't get this thing working. Incredibly, the CCD device is still available for sale, and I was able to find one for sale on eBay for only $8, which was kind of a pleasant surprise. Now, what does a CCD failure look like? And you might see abnormal brightness. You might see brightness sort of dripping or ripping or whatever you want to call it. The photographs it takes will be very abnormal. Here's an example of a photograph that I took with this camera, and you can just see everything. The brightness is very overexposed. You get these very fine horizontal lines running through the picture. It has kind of a purple hue to it. Here's another picture, similar problems. This is another outdoor picture of bushes and trees, and you can hardly make out anything. Again, that purple color and the horizontal lines and the overexposures, that's typical of a CCD failure. Let's see if we can't take this thing apart and replace that CCD. I was rather pleased and amazed to learn that a replacement CCD is still available for this camera, and at a very reasonable price. This one cost me $8 from a distributor on eBay. This is where I bought the CCD replacement for the Canon PowerShot A85, from this site on eBay. I don't know how long this will be available for, or whether anybody else will be carrying it, but at least I was able to get this one. We will disassemble the camera. Now, just a couple of things to note. What I normally do is I'll have some kind of a container. I like to use these old pill jars to hold all the little tiny screws and things that come out of here. The screws and parts are so tiny, if they fall into the carpet, you're probably not going to find them ever again. So put them someplace safe so you don't lose them. You'll need a Phillips head screwdriver with a really small point on it. You're going to get screws of different sizes, and sometimes it's hard to remember where they go. It's good to take notes as you're going. Now, I like to use this little cheap plastic micrometer to measure parts and measure screws and things. And then I'll make note of where they were so I can remember to put them back in the right hole. Another good idea is whenever you're working on stuff like this is maybe take a few pictures with another camera so you can remember where things were. I will shoot pictures with a different camera as I'm going so that if I can't remember where something was, I can refer back to that picture. Of course, and we're going to have the video film as well to review. Okay, so we will begin, and we will start by removing our batteries. Next, we will remove our memory card. Push it this way, and then flip it that way. Press this little button, and out it comes. And there is this ring around the lens. Press this button and just turn that and get it off. There are many small screws within this camera. Most of them will have a shaft diameter of about 1.5 millimeters. And they will come either as very fine thread screws, and those go into metal, or coarser thread screws. Most of the fine thread screws will be either 2 millimeters in length or 3.5 millimeters in length. Okay, we'll take out the visible screws that we can see. Along the bottom, we've got 3 screws. 1, 2, and 3. We'll go ahead and take those out now. Now, the 3 screws that came out of here were fine thread 2 millimeter long screws. Along the side under this flap, there's another screw. This screw is fine thread 3.5 millimeter. Here inside the memory card compartment, there's a screw. This is a fine thread 2 millimeter screw. Inside the battery compartment, we have 2 screws. We'll take those out now. Those 2 screws are coarse threaded screws because they are going into plastic, and they are 4 millimeters in length. Now here inside the memory card compartment, there's a screw way down deep here. We're going to take that out. Okay, now this screw is longer than the others. This is a coarse thread screw, and it is 6 millimeters in length. Now we have removed all the visible superficial screws. Now there's a subassembly right up here. This is a separate piece right here, and it contains the speaker, and it contains the zoom in and out controller. Now this piece here is important because it holds on several other pieces. It holds on the back cover, and it holds on the memory compartment cover. And there's a metal piece inside of this this anchor for the strap, which is also held on by this piece. So in order to disassemble the camera, we have to get this piece off first. Now this piece is held on with 2 screws deep inside of the battery compartment. And we can see those. One of the screws is there, and the other screw is there. Okay, we will remove those. Okay, now these 2 screws that came out from inside the battery compartment, these are both coarse screws and 4 millimeters in length. This piece is now free to move. Now if you lift it up a little bit, you can then release the door that covers the memory card. That gives it enough clearance to get out of there. Okay. Okay, now with that loose, just pry it up a little bit, we can now get the back cover off. Okay, as soon as we pull the back cover off, this little piece of metal here falls out. It comes from up in here. There's a little slot right up there. Right under here, there's a little slot in there, and this part here fits right in there, like so, okay? Like that. So you'll need to replace that when you're reassembling it. Now this part is loose, and it's held on with 2 very small wires. We want to be careful not to break those wires. That's where the speaker is. Now that we have the back off, we have to deal with the capacitor here, this long black cylinder. This is what holds the power to drive the flash. And this capacitor has a lot of voltage on it, and it will hurt you. So we have to discharge this somehow. The easiest way would simply to turn off the camera and remove the batteries and let it sit for a couple days. But if you're in a hurry, you can't necessarily do that. So we're going to discharge it. First, let's measure it. Let's see what kind of voltages we're talking about. We put it on our voltmeter. Okay, we will measure the voltage at these terminals. And we're measuring only 12 volts. Okay, that's good. So I think it's safe to proceed. But the voltage on that thing when it's fully charged will be about 250 volts, and that is very painful if it discharges through you. If I need to discharge a capacitor like that, what I will do is I will take a big power resistor like this, and I will discharge it through the terminals. Like I will touch it to the terminals and let it drain through the resistor. You don't want to just drop a screwdriver or some piece of metal and just short it out. You want to let it drain out. So you put that resistor across it for a couple seconds, and that will drain out that voltage. But a good idea to use a voltmeter to check the voltage before you proceed, and then drain the capacitor if you have to. Okay, now that we have taken care of the capacitor, we can now start digging deeper into this thing. Okay, so now we've got 4 screws here. We have one here by the control wheel. We have one here on the circuit board here. We have another one on the circuit board over here. And then we have got this one underneath also holding that circuit board. We'll go ahead and remove all 4 of those. Okay, we've got those 4 screws out. This screw, and this screw were 2mm fine threads. This one was a 3.5mm long fine thread. Now we've got this situation on the top with the speaker being held by these 2 delicate wires. There is a socket here. This thing is plugged into a socket. I think we should probably go ahead and just remove this thing. As long as it's dangling out there, I'm afraid we're eventually going to end up breaking it. So let's maybe get it out of harm's way. Hopefully this thing will pry out without breaking anything. Okay, I was able to grip this with my needle nose pliers and pull it out of the socket without damaging anything, I hope. Okay, so now this is out of harm's way, so those wires hopefully won't end up getting broken. Now, in this hole here, there is a screw. And I'm going to have to get my screwdriver in here to get that screw out of there without dropping it inside of the mechanism here. We will remove that screw, and it is a 3.5mm long fine thread screw. Now we'll see if we can separate the front cover from the electronics package. Okay, good, we got that off. One thing to point out here is that the memory battery is accessible here if you need to replace it. Okay, if your camera isn't holding settings, there's the battery right there. It's measuring 2.4 volts, so it is holding charge. It's a 3-volt rechargeable battery. The number is MS614S. It does appear to be holding charge, so I'm going to leave that. That's how you can get to it and replace it if you have to. Something else to point out here. If you do have any battery corrosion from previous battery leaks, you can now get at those very deep battery terminals. They're now exposed, and I do have a little bit of battery leakage on this terminal, which I will clean up. At the top, the control wheel is held in by this screw. We will go ahead and remove that screw. It is a 2mm fine thread screw. Now, with that screw removed, this little control wheel is held on just by a little peg to kind of wiggle it a little bit. There we go. Get it out. On the front here, there's a piece which is very easy to lose. Right here, there's this little plastic piece. If you find that lying on the ground or something, it came right from here. The CCD is going to be between the lens and the view screen. I'm going to try to approach it from this side. The LCD screen has got a screw holding it under here, but access to that screw is being blocked by the viewfinder. So we will have to remove the viewfinder. The viewfinder is held by 3 screws, 2 on the top, which are one is in there and one is right there, and then one on the front, which is right there. We'll go ahead and remove those 3 screws. This third one's a little hard because there's not a lot of room to work there. Okay, that's all 3 of them. These screws are different than any others that we've encountered. They are thinner. The shaft is thinner. It's only about 1 millimeter in thickness. And these screws are 4 millimeters long, and they're a coarse thread. With those 2 screws removed, the viewfinder becomes loose, but it's not It's not completely free. It's being held by something. Okay, there it goes. It's being held by this little tab right here. Just kind of had to give it a good tug to get it to come loose. We'll sort of just move it out of the way. Now we have a cable in our way right here. That's blocking access to our screw. A very delicate cable. We don't want to damage it. Okay, it just slides out. Okay. Okay, now that cable is out of the way. We can now take out this screw. And this screw holding on the LCD panel is a 3 millimeters in length and a fine thread. The LCD panel is partially loose. If I lift up this underneath, maybe I can get it a little looser still. Now this metal plate that this circuit board sits on is sort of blocking the way, it seems. I think I'm going to have to lift the entire circuit board off of it. I wonder if I can elevate this and get it through there. I'm going to use a flathead screwdriver to gently lift this cable up. It's got these two little flat pins there. They're sort of holding this circuit board cable thing. There's one, and there's the other. Okay. I think we have got it maybe loose enough. There is a cable here that connects to the LCD screen, and perhaps we can loosen it up here. Pushing those two little blue tabs back should loosen up that cable so it can slide out of that connector. Now with that cable out, we can fold this back. Now that we've got the LCD screen out of the way, we can get a good look at the inside here. Now here is part of our charge couple device, and it's being partially covered by this cable here. And this cable here, there's two cables. And there's this piece of yellow tape covering it. We'll have to remove this yellow tape here to expose this CCD. Okay, I've been working on this piece of tape for a while. It's stuck on there really tight. I used a hair dryer on it to kind of get that glue to let go a little bit. Now here's our replacement, and it is plugged into a socket way down in there. Now this first cable here, I think I can just sort of fold that back a bit and get access to this cable underneath it, plugged into this white socket right here. Now we have this cable here in the way. I think we just have to give that a good tug to get that out of there. Okay, I've gone ahead and tugged on this cable and had to, it's in there really tightly, this cable right here, but I managed to pull it out. And when I've done so, now of course now we have exposed the CCD a lot better. Okay, so now we get this screw, and this screw here is a little bit underneath here, but I think we can get it. Those three screws hold on the CCD. Now also with this tape out of the way, I think we can pull out this cable here that it goes to the CCD. Now another thing I did that I didn't actually film, but the viewfinder is connected to this cable right here. And this cable, there are a couple LEDs on this cable, and they're held on like just these two little pegs. I just did that to get it out of the way so I wouldn't damage this cable. Now I think we can remove our CCD. And here's our replacement CCD. This CCD is held on with T4 Torx, T-O-R-X Torx, T4 size Torx screws. So if you're going to consider this job, you should really probably order this in advance if you don't already have one. Okay, we'll try this one under here. Just barely have enough clearance there. Okay, 2 screws out and 1 to go. Okay, all 3 of these tiny Torx screws are out. Now the CCD is loose. And all we have to do is disconnect the connector that's holding it in over here. Alrighty, I've lifted up this metal frame here a little bit. Maybe we can see a little better what's going on. And we can kind of see this connector here. It looks like it's one of these ones you have to kind of flip it down. There it goes. Aha, and there it is. There is the bad CCD. Here is the new CCD. And we can see that they are identical. New one, old one. Okay, now we're going to have to put this one in and reverse everything that we've done. Now, one thing about this new CCD, it's got a little plastic cover on it. Presumably we need to pull off before we install that thing. I guess that's just to provide protection to the CCD before it's installed. After removing the CCD, I ran into a bit of a surprise. Turns out that underneath the CCD, there are these 2 tiny little springs here, and then there's 3 washers here, here, and under there, where the screws go through. Now, if I had known that those were there ahead of time, I would have disconnected the cable first and then unscrewed this thing so I could get it out without moving things around. In the process of pulling this out the way I did, those washers and springs went all over the place. I was lucky to find them all and figure out where they came from. But those are there. Washer, washer, spring, spring, and then underneath here, another washer. Now I'm going to have to put the new CCD in without those things getting moved around. They are absolutely loose. There's just nothing holding them in place. And these springs are so tiny. I'm not even sure what they do, but they are there, so we should probably keep them there. Now here's the new CCD, and it's got this little tab on it here, and I'm assuming that that is to protect the CCD, and it has to come off. Okay, just pull that off. I have to maneuver this thing into position somehow without messing up all those washers and springs and everything. There is our connector under there. This is going to be tricky. That darn tape is just driving me nuts. Okay, I've managed to get the first screw here started. I have to get the others. The hard part is keeping those washers aligned as you're putting in the screws. I got one in so far. Okay, I have managed to line up all 3 of these screws with the washers and everything in place, which was not easy to do. Just kind of finger tight. Okay, the new CCD is in place. Now we have to snap in that connector. Okay, now I've managed to maneuver that cable end into that socket. Now I need to close that little latch on top of it. Okay, so there's our cable, and there's our connector, and there's that little blue snap, which closes over it, and I think we've got it in place now. Okay, so our new CCD is bolted down, and the cable is snapped into place. Now next we have to reconnect this cable to this socket here, and that was really hard to get out. I have a feeling it's going to be just as hard to get it back in, maybe even harder. Okay, I managed to get this this cable plugged back into that socket again. It's in pretty firmly. I basically had to take these pliers and just sort of force it in, a little bit at a time, but it looks like we got that in. Now we need to reconnect our LCD screen, and there is this cable and this socket here. We need to maneuver that cable into that socket. There's our socket, there's our cable. I need to get that cable to kind of slide in there, and then we can push these little blue devices here that lock it in place. I have managed to use a pair of tweezers to maneuver this cable into the socket. Then I was able to push these two blue tabs in and lock it in place. Okay, so our LCD screen should be connected, and this cable to illuminate the backlights, I never did disconnect that. I just left that in place. Now I can sort of push everything down into place here like this. Okay, now we can secure the LCD screen in place. There is this one little 3mm finely threaded screw through the top right here. Okay, that screws in place and our screen is secured in place. Now that that screw is in place, we can now reconnect this cable. Okay, that cable is now reconnected. We now need to connect the viewfinder to its cable. Two little pegs right here and two little holes right there. Okay, good. Now we can connect the viewfinder back to the top of the camera. Now the viewfinder has this little latch thing on it, a little latch right there that goes through a little hole right here. Okay, with a little bit of a push, it snapped in with a click. Okay, now it's held in place. Now there are 3 screws that hold this viewfinder in place, one in the front and 2 on the top. And those screws are a little bit narrower than the other screws. And those screws on the top, they go through a hole there, and they go through a hole there. Because there is so little room to work in this space here, probably that's the best place to start, because when it's loose, you'll have a little bit of extra room. Really, really narrow. Okay, that's 1. And that's 2. Okay, now the viewfinder is secured back into place. Now we've got the LCD screen and the viewfinder back on. Now we have to deal with our flat cable here. When we disassembled it, there was a 3.5mm screw that we got by inserting our screwdriver through this hole. It's a little bit challenging, but now with this flat cable loose, we'll have a little bit better access to getting that screw down in there. So I'm going to go ahead and put that 3.5mm fine thread screw back in now, here. That's a little bit easier with the access like that. We have a 3.5mm screw on the underside of this as well. We'll go ahead and put that in too. Okay. Now for the flat cable. A couple things going on here. It's a little bit tricky. This part of the cable right here. It's sort of slipped out of its slot. It's supposed to be in here. And let's see if we can't get that back in where it belongs. There's a hole here, and there's a little post right here, and that's where it's supposed to be fixed to. You might have to manhandle it here a little bit. Okay, I've managed to get it back in here. This little button here is the memory card ejection button. I managed to tuck that back inside of there. Okay, that's good. This memory cable is held in place by some pegs. There's a peg there, and there's a peg there. Also on the top. But there's a peg here and a peg here for this part. Now on top here, there are these 2 little tabs here. And this part of the cable has to slide underneath those tabs. Okay, it's like a little groove right there and there for this to accommodate this cable here. Okay, now I've got it in there. I've got it in that little slot there. Now this will lie more flat. Now this cable will line up with these two pegs, like that. And there's another peg here as well. I think our flat cable is now in place. Two little metal hooks right there, supposed to hold that part. We need to put two screws in now. There's a 3.5 millimeter fine thread screw that goes here and one that goes here. We'll go ahead and put those in now. Next, we will put on the control wheel. There's a little post right here that kind of helps hold it in place. It will sort of squish this part of the flat cable a little bit. And it's held on with two 3.5 millimeter screws that are located here and here. The flat cable appears to be in properly, and the control wheel is on. Now we are ready to put the front of the camera back on. Just a couple of fine details to remember. There is this ring gasket that goes around the lens. And there's this little piece here, this little plastic piece here that slides in like so. Perhaps if I put it on this way, gravity will hold those in place for us. Okay, just sort of slowly working it in. Okay, one of the things it's catching on is this little shaft here slid. You have to kind of slide it back into place. It can actually slide out on you, so pushing it back in place, that should give us the room we need. And there we go. Okay. So in this hinge, there's a metal shaft that runs the length of that hinge, and that metal shaft can slide. It was actually slid out, okay? You just sort of push it back until it aligns, and then you can push the front cover on. Now on top, we've got the subsystem here that contains the speaker and the zoom in and out control and the trigger to take the pictures. Now we need to reconnect our cable here. This little green cable has got to be connected first. Very small connector. Okay, we got that speaker plugged back in again. Now we are about ready to put on the back cover. And before we do, I'm going to take a little glass cleaner. I got my greasy fingerprints all over this screen. Get some of those greasy fingerprints off, also off the viewfinder. Once that cover goes on, you won't have access to this, so now's the time. Now we have this top piece reconnected. Now this part here gets a little tricky. This top piece here sort of interlocks several pieces into place. So it's a little tricky, you know, with only two hands to get all this together. Now we have this piece here. This piece here fits into this top piece, kind of like this. Now the other part, the front piece here, also has to snap in here as well, because this little edge here holds it. And also, the battery door also slips in here as well. So you've got all these pieces at once. Snap that into place. I'm just going to put a piece of electrical tape here to kind of hold that, make sure that doesn't slip. because it's holding like 3 different pieces at once. This top piece is held in place by 2 screws down deep here. Two screws go in there. One goes there and one goes there, and those 2 screws hold this piece in place. We'll go ahead and put those in now. This would be good to have a longer screwdriver here. Okay, we will no longer need that piece of tape on there. We have 2 more 4mm coarse screws that go here and here. We'll go ahead and put those in. Now we have our longest screw, the longest screw in the whole system, the one right there. That's a 6mm coarse thread screw. We'll put that in. Last couple screws to go in. On the back we got a 2mm fine thread screw here. On the bottom we've got 3 2mm screws here, here, and here. And on this side we've got a 3.5mm fine thread screw that goes here. And last but not least, we've got this little screw-on thing that covers the lens. Okay, now our Canon A85 PowerShot has been reassembled, and so now we're ready to test it. We'll go ahead and put the batteries in. And we'll go ahead and put memory into it. Now, we're ready to hit the power button and test it out. Yes, it comes to life. The lens telescopes out, the LED screen comes on, and everything seems to be working. Excellent. So now we will go take some pictures and see how they look. Here is a scene before the repair. Here is a photograph of that same scene after the repair. Here is another photograph before the repair. Here is that same location after the repair. So quite a dramatic difference. It appears that our new CC has done the trick. So the CCD was the problem, and we were able to successfully replace it and repair the camera back to normal operating conditions. Okay, so if I can do it, you can do it. Now, it will be a lot easier for you because you now have this video to walk you through it step by step. I made this video primarily because there was no good video about how to do this. So I decided to make my own in case anybody else tries to attempt this repair. Okay, well, if you're going to do this repair yourself, good luck.